Welcome everyone to the Unboxing Careers podcast, where we shed light on what different careers are really like so that you can choose a career you'll really love. I'm your host, Greg Zakowicz, and today we dive into the food science space with Bryan Quoc. But before we do, let's talk briefly about unboxing thoughtful gifts. At thoughtfulcollection.com, you can shop from a wide selection of curated products you can feel good about, helping you express friendship, gratitude, and love. The next time you need to, don't just gift, give thoughtfully at thoughtfulcollection.com. All right, I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Bryan Quoc, food scientist and food industry consultant. So, Bryan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. We were talking offline. We are now Unalone brothers. So, we've got Unalone tattoos. Just saying, kindred spirits here. So, this will be a good one. All right, let's start with this, Bryan. What is a food scientist? Like, what do you do? And the follow-up question is that how do you figure out, hey, this is what I want to do? Because it seems very niche to me.
Yeah, it's been actually a crazy journey for me because I started off in chemistry as an undergraduate, and I got my degree, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So for whatever reason, I decided to walk across the country in a sort of like pause sabbatical. So I started off in California, and then I walked all the way to Louisiana, about over 2,000 miles in 6 months. And I had so much time on my hands. All I thought about was food because I had to eat 4,000, 5,000 calories per day. And I didn't know. I was so surprised by my limited knowledge about food because I would go to the grocery store, along different towns, and I'd look at the ingredients. I'd be like, I don't know what this is for. Like, what is all this? And I was a chemist, and that seemed kind of strange to me. So it got stuck in the back of my head, and I kept wondering, like, what's all this for? Why does food taste good? There's a lot of these scientific thoughts in my head, and I put that away for a little bit, kind of meandered around, did some research, taught a little bit of high school chemistry. I did all sorts of other things. And then eventually I found a research journal that was like, hey, there's this field called food science, and you study flavors. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is a field. Like, I didn't know anything about it. My university didn't have food science, and I think there's only like 30 or 40 universities in the U.S. that offer food science as an actual degree, let alone a graduate degree. So once I heard that, I was like, okay, that's it. That's the PhD I need to go into. So I jumped in and all that.
All right, so I've got two questions here. One, I'm going to start with the walking first, because the other one will segue back into the focus of the podcast here. So why are you walking from California to Louisiana? Like, what is, like, you just sit around one day and be like, yeah, I could probably do that walk.
It was weird. My dad actually passed away the year before, and I just thought I needed a bit of reset. And I don't know, that seemed like the most appropriate thing for me to do because my dad, he couldn't walk for a lot of his life. He was disabled. And in my head, I was just thinking like, well, I'm going to walk for him, and I'll spend these months like thinking about him and working through that and kind of learning a little bit more about what life is like outside of the classroom, outside of academia. What are people like? I really wanted to explore myself as well as, what's the real, American like what is this country all about? And I really, really wanted to get at the root of that because it always bugged me that I was basically living in a bubble, first a bubble of university, and then another bubble of, I live a certain, socioeconomic status. And, I don't know anything about outside of that. So I needed to really explore that.
Excellent. Back roads or interstate? Like you parallel the interstates or what? Okay.
A little bit of both. Yeah. Whatever worked, as long as there's no one messing around with me.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds like that might have happened once or twice, but all right, let's digress.
Okay.
All right. You mentioned chemistry major in college. A couple questions on this. So you said you didn't really know what you wanted to do. So I guess let's take a step back. When did you kind of decide that chemistry was going to be your jam? Like, when did you get into that? And then
Yeah.
the backside of that is, like, did you have a plan going into college for chemistry, and then that it just kind of fizzled out and be like, okay, thought I wanted to do that. I don't actually want to do that. I just don't know what the replacement is. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Sure, definitely. I was really good at chemistry in high school. I think that's mostly because of my dad. My dad was a doctor, and he really hammered in a lot of. He was really great at chemistry, so he really hammered that into me. And so, honestly, I'm immigrant family. Both my parents are Vietnamese refugees, so for them, it was like be a doctor. I mean, it also helped that my dad was a doctor, so there's a very much a strong motivation to be really good in the sciences, and I happened to be right. So, and I spent a good portion of my college career just really hitting the books. I loved chemistry. I really enjoyed the subject, but I never really connected it with a career. And I always thought, okay, I guess I'll go to medical school. And then around my sophomore year, something really clicked in me that said, I'm not really cut out to be a doctor. And that I think that just happened when I realized there was no impulse in me to think like, yeah, that would be the next, 10, 20, 30 years of my life. And it was a lot. It was to think about all the hard work. It was just going to get harder and harder, right? I could do the chemistry, but that's like, 10% of the actual field. So I thought, well, I'll just keep doing this chemistry thing and see where it goes. There was a lot of times when I decided like, oh, maybe I should do something different. But I was so good at it. I just ended up just graduating with that major. But I never really considered like, what do I do with it? What's next?
And you figured it on the walk, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
somehow.
so, so your father was speaking to you, right, through
Yeah,
that walk, which I
yeah,
think is super awesome.
yeah. There's something
Uh,
there. Definitely, definitely.
all right, so let's kind of tackle it this way then. So you mentioned kind of dealing with flavors and things like that. Can you give the audience a little sense of like one or two types of projects you might have worked on? And if you can't mention the brand name, just white label it. But like, what's a typical project that you might work on as a food scientist?
Yeah, so my specific subdiscipline is alternative proteins. So things like plant-based meat, meat analogs, that sort of thing. And so I will help a company develop the flavor system. So let's say you want, a soy patty, but you really want it to taste like meat. I really dig pretty deep into, what are the chemical reactions that happen in something like that in a food product when you're searing it, and how do you mimic the exact flavor compounds that are produced when you do the same thing with meat products. And that's like a wild ride because there's so many different factors and variables, and that really engages the chemist in me. And so I'm really grateful to be able to do that. But at the same time, it's this wonderful aspect of, hey, now this is actually something that is affecting a human life, like in their day to day life. Like everyone has to eat, and it's really cool that there's that connection between and that relationship between the chemistry and actually someone that's gonna have a meal one day.
So we're gonna have to end this short because I got to hit you offline. I stopped eating meat 5 years ago, so I got to hit you on this like meat based stuff to see what I should be avoiding and not. So all right, so that's really cool. Let's walk through a little bit. Like, what if you were going back and doing it over again? Like, and you could probably speak to this somewhat because you got your PhD and then went into the space. So what's a typical career path look like for someone that maybe wants to go into this particular concentration?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, starting off with some kind of STEM degree, whether it's biology, chemistry, or even food science as an undergrad, is really the best way to go. If you end up in one of the more allied sciences, it's a little trickier because there's not exactly a direct route, but you just have to apply to something in the food industry. And usually they'll pick you up because they know that people who've done chemistry or they've done biology usually have had a lot of the same background and they can pick things up pretty quickly. So with a food science degree, it's a little more general. If you're learning a little bit of engineering that's related to food, you're learning a little bit about microbiology, but overall, you're kind of learning a lot of it on the job, essentially.
What's like one, is there a lot of competition in that field, or is it there's a big need for the field? Let's get there first.
There's a huge need for the field. Now,
Okay.
that being said, the positions they kind of ebb and flow. But certainly once you get the position, it's pretty stable because everyone has to eat. So there's always a demand for food scientists. Um, but it's not a well-known job or field, right? Like not a lot of people know that that's a career that you can go down. So it can be really tough to find these specific opportunities, and they're not always available.
And then there's obviously big corporations, right? McDonald's, Taco Bell, they have food science departments. They're coming up with new, flavors and new product offerings. You have, CPG brands that kind of do the same thing in there. This is going to vary kind of based on kind of what you want out of your career, but is that the holy grail to work for one of these large corporations? Is the holy grail to kind of be exposed to it all and kind of do what you're doing now or consulting? Like, where's the pinnacle? Where's the prototypical pinnacle of the career?
Honestly, I think when I really think about where people want to be, there is the master flavor chemist, and which requires an extraordinary amount of time and specialization and expertise because you actually have to do an apprenticeship at a flavor company, right? So behind all of the products that you see, whether it's PepsiCo, whether it's McDonald's, and so on and so forth, there are only a handful, maybe two or three big flavor companies that are basically like the Willy Wonka of of flavors. Like they have everything, all the compounds, all the laboratory equipment, anything that you would need, and analytical tools. It's nuts. So you have all that at your disposal, and you go through this entire career path where all you do is get really good at flavors. And you have to spend 7 years on apprenticeship in these flavor
Wow.
companies. On top, so not only is it usually recommended to have some kind of science degree, but then you also have to take these professional tests to get certified in what's known as the Society of Flavor Chemists. But once you do, it's like it's pretty remarkable what they can do. It's very coveted. There's only a handful of certified flavor chemists in the world. So it's pretty cool.
Was that ever something that was appealing to you, or did you look at it and go, no, not for me?
I thought about it, but I honestly really love being able to do what I do on my own. So I just it's more like I hacked the flavor chemistry route. I get to do as much as I like. Certainly don't have all the resources, but I get to dabble whenever I can.
Awesome. So, Bryan, I want to talk a little bit about what a typical week looks like for you. Now, this is probably going to vary based on projects you're working on, but try to break down a little bit of a typical week. And maybe if you just want to pick a random project that you work on to give that as a baseline, but, talk about meetings, talk about like you're dealing with flavors. How do you go about figuring out a flavor to start? Like, where's your starting point and what are kind of the methodologies that go into that, if you could?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of what I do, since I'm run my own business as a consultant for food companies, I will usually have initial meetings with different clients that will reach out to me and ask, okay, well, this is a project that I want to do. I want to develop this particular beverage, or I want to work on building this particular meat analog, or so on and so forth. There's seasonings, there's all sorts of things. And so we sit down, we discuss what are the sort of parameters of the project. Do you want it to be organic? Do you want it to be clean label? Do you want to be, where do you want to position yourself in the market? And once I get all that information, then I sit down and I design the product in an Excel spreadsheet, basically. So I know sort of the general sense of how much salt you kind of need and how much of this particular yeast extract that you need. And all these different ingredients. I'll read a bunch. I'll do some textbook reading to get my brain into gear. Honestly, I don't know everything. So for the most part, I'm relying a lot on where to find knowledge, not that I have the knowledge internally in my head. So once I get that all down, I draft it up, send it to the client, and they'll send it back to me, and we'll talk about maybe we can include this ingredient, remove this one. Usually it's preservatives or artificial sweeteners or that sort of thing. they'll want to remove things like that nowadays. It's pretty big in vogue to keep things natural. And
Yeah.
then, after a little bit of going back and forth, then I purchase all the ingredients and materials, and I'll produce the product, and then I'll ship it out. And that's usually my week. It's a pretty nice week. It can be a little hectic in the kitchen, honestly, because I work between my laboratory that I built in my garage, and then also in the kitchen to sort of, there's certain things I need to do that I can't really do in the garage. So yeah, it's a.
I was just going to ask whether you go into the kitchen or you've got like a rentable, like a rented kitchen somewhere to deal with all this. So
Yeah, no,
yeah, makes
it's
sense.
I hack a lot of things. I'm a big DIY type of person. As a kid in high school, I actually built my own chemistry laboratory, and so I've used all those skills to make my living. I joked to my mom a while back, and I told her, all those times that you were so frustrated with me as I was, playing around with different chemicals, it actually paid out pretty
Yeah,
well. So thank you for that, Mom.
there you go. So when you start, like, hey, I'm going to get to the kitchen, is it like 1 or 2 hours you're normally doing this? Or are you going through and doing like 20 different versions with different concentrations? What's that process going to look like?
Yeah, I'll probably spend about 3 to 4 hours. Usually, I can key in on the very critical types of variations that will make the biggest dent. So I don't make 30 or 40 variations. I think that just takes too much time, and
Yeah.
I don't have anyone to work with. So it's usually my own hands that I'm doing things. So I'll maybe do 6 or 10 variations, and then from those variations, once I get something that I'm getting a little closer, I'll take that and I'll do another set of variations on a different set of variables, maybe 3 or 4. So maybe on one axis, I'll say, okay, I'm going to vary up the salt, and then choose the one that seems like it's going to be the best out of those 6, and then I'll choose one where I change the salt, the sugar parameters, and the sweetness. I'll play around with that, and usually I can get pretty close to what I need in a fairly fast amount of time. I've had enough experience to learn what's necessary and what's not necessary.
Awesome. So if someone wants to go into this field or loose, tangentially related one, what are some essential skills they either need to be good at or they should start honing because they will become valuable for you down the road?
I mean, just learning chemistry is so huge. I think for me personally, and I can't speak to everyone else, but I can pick up microbiology pretty quickly, and I can pick up a little bit of engineering. I'm not great at math, but I'll work my way through. But chemistry is one of those things where you really do need a lot of experience in and have had time in the laboratory and understand like the different techniques, because you can read about it, but it's very different when you have a hands-on practical approach to mixing things and understanding their reactions and knowing what's going to happen in the long term in terms of the stability of certain compounds. It's very difficult for someone to really pick that up on the job. But that's also my bias because I started off in chemistry. So.
Hey, that's fair. Biases are okay. So, Brian, what do you like most about your work?
Gosh, I love how many different challenges there are. And I get to learn so many different things. Like I mentioned, like I don't have a background in microbiology, but I definitely had to pick it up really quickly to learn about food safety, to learn about, dealing with spoilage, microorganisms, that sort of thing. And then, I get to dabble a little bit in engineering, and I have to pick up my calculus book, and which is not the most exciting thing, but it does force me to relearn some things that I didn't think I would continue to use um, as a high school student. So it's really nice to touch on different aspects and then see how they come together, because a lot of fields, they're kind of siloed. They're kind of like engineers hang out with engineers and computer scientists hang out with computer scientists. But I'm using all sorts of different tools and different skill sets. And it's really fun because I can take a piece of software, use it to build and design a food product, and then I'll test it out. I'll send it to a laboratory, a microbiology laboratory. They'll send me the results. I get to read it. Then I read, the research on it, and it all kind of fits together. So yeah, I would say the fact that there's so many disciplines that I have to keep track of, it's actually really, really enjoyable for me, because I've never been much of a specialist. I really like to dabble in a lot of different things. And this allows me to do that.
Oh, that's awesome. How about the flip side of that? What do you like least about your work?
I think I have a hard time with the business side. I'm
Okay.
not. I think it can be challenging because it's not my most comfortable aspect of my personality, which is to be a little more hard headed and to not necessarily. You have to set boundaries with people and say, like, I'm not going to do that much work because you didn't pay me for that. Or, I think definitely talking about finances can be really challenging. But I've learned a lot through doing that, and I've learned a lot about my relationship with finances, and that's actually helped me improve other parts of my life. So while annoying and very difficult, and sometimes very scary, because occasionally I'll run into a client that might potentially sue me, or there's a high risk of something having gone wrong, and it's not entirely my fault, but I have to take responsibility for it. So yeah, that's probably my least favorite part of the whole business.
It's a good answer. It's a good answer. But you like learning, so you'll get better at that. And
yeah.
That's the fun part of it.
Exactly.
So, Bryan, I want to get into advice specifically for students now. I do have a question. Let's start with high school, because it might be the same advice in college, but it might be different. And I'm going to feed you an answer. And if that's the answer, that's okay. But if you're talking to someone in high school who is maybe either interested, they know that, like, they listen to this and go, oh, it's kind of a cool field, that's what I want to do. Or they know they want to go into, I don't know, physics. Maybe they're thinking about physics, but they don't know. Your answer might be, well, take a physics class, and if you hate it, it's probably not the best career for you. But is there any, outside of that, any particular advice for someone to do a class, organization, to either confirm they might be a good fit for it, or confirm that, yeah, you're probably not a good fit for it?
So I love this question, because this touches upon something that I learned very recently about myself, which was that growing up, I hated writing, and I hated every single writing course I ever took. I hated English, just terrible at it. And then I started doing it as a hobby. Very late in my career, during graduate school, I decided just to write about food science because I thought it was kind of fun. And then over time, I got good enough where a publisher reached out to me and asked me if I could write a book on food science. And in my head, I thought, I had no preconceived notion that I could be even halfway decent as a writer, let alone to write a book. So the fact that I constantly got this feedback that I was actually a really good writer, suggested to me that actually don't take the courses that you enjoy, not up front, or don't. If you're not good at it, that's not necessarily the best indicator for whether or not it's going to be something.
Okay.
Cool. Mostly because my experience was that there are certain things I did not enjoy in an educational setting that I enjoyed very much in a professional setting. So these things are not necessarily correlated.
Awesome. And I think I said physics before. I meant chemistry. I think I said physics. I reverted back to my own high school days where I went from chemistry to physics and AP physics. So that's my fault there. So that's good advice. So I know the answer to this, but did you write the book?
I did, and I published it,
What?
and people really liked it. And I was
shameless plug. We'll look at the description, but shameless plug. What's the name of it?
So it's 150 food science questions answered. So
awesome. And who's the best audience for it?
I think high school students, college students. It seems like that's where people really like reading at that level, learning all about food science and how it intersects with cooking and things in the kitchen. All sorts of different fun facts. And I loved writing it because I felt like it was such a great way for me to connect with younger audiences and learn more about what were important things. And it still continues to be a great way for me to connect with people.
That's awesome. I'm going to give you the same question for college. If the answer is the same, we can blow past it. But I want to ask you before, you mentioned that you graduated, but there's no direct path to go into food science. But you
Mm-hmm.
said there
Mm-hmm.
are some food science specific universities.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go the other way? So if I go to a food science university and I get done, or I get 3 years and I'm like, I'm going to finish this, but I don't want to do food science anymore. Is it easy to transfer to a different career with that knowledge than maybe it is to transfer into it without the knowledge?
Yeah, I would say so. Certainly, there's so many other things you can do, even with a food science background that doesn't necessarily involve food. I mean, I've seen people even go all the way into pharmaceuticals, right? Like it's pretty remarkable how versatile that degree is. So you definitely learn a lot of very similar applications in other fields, and I've seen people even go into business or marketing, or it certainly doesn't pigeonhole you in the food industry. Whereas it could be a little challenging to take yourself from a different field, probably not a STEM field, but more like a marketing field, or if you did your degree in English. Although I've seen it, and it's really remarkable what people do to do that, and get into the food industry. Yeah.
Awesome. So thank you for that. Any specific advice to college students that kind of the same lines of high school, or is it about the same as just kind of explore different things?
Yeah, certainly explore different things. I think it's
Okay.
really important to get a little taste of everything, so to speak. I think it's really good to you always have an idea of what you like, which is really different from the reality. And I think kind of getting a little bit of that friction is really important, because it kind of grounds you and lets you get an idea of what you can and can't tolerate.
Makes sense. So Brian, how about the most challenging aspect of your career? What would you think that is?
I think it would be, I have to really think about that. I think it's the lack of consistent schedule, because I don't work at a company. I do everything myself, and so I have to build my own schedule. So I finally have to be my own parent. Um, certainly get myself up, and I actually rely on my wife too much on that. The dogs are definitely waking me up in the morning, so I'm grateful for them. But I think without a very clear agenda or tasks to do, it's very easy for me to use up time and burn up time in ways that aren't necessarily productive, and it can be hard. I think there are certainly days where I don't necessarily want to do my work, even if I built my own business, and I have to say I need to step back and decide I go for a run or take a walk. So I at least have that flexibility. But when you're in it all the time, I think that makes it really difficult, because I always think about my business. I think about you know, where the next paycheck is going to come from.
Makes sense. Do you find you mentioned two things there, and obviously you've walked a long distance before, so I'm going to say the answer is yes. But when you kind of get stuck in that rut or lack of motivation, do you find physical activity is the thing that breaks you out of it?
Absolutely. I mean, just doing something completely different is so helpful, because I'm a guy who spends a lot of time in his head. And then of course this kind of work makes me think so much. It's really important for me to step back and play with the dogs, go for a run, that sort of thing. Otherwise, I just my brain fatigues. I mean, I think
Yeah,
everyone knows that your brain is works kind of like a muscle. I mean, at some point, it's gonna stop working. So you need to take a step back and let it rest.
I said I'm going to flip I'm going to that question around and tell me the most rewarding part of working in the food sciences field.
I love that I can help someone who is building their food business, and I can give them a piece of knowledge or an idea that they would have never thought of. And it'd be so routine for me because I'm so steeped in it. But the sort of effort to feedback level is really great to see. People going, oh my gosh, I'm glad that I knew that, and then that saved me X amount of time or money, and it's really nice to know that I'm helping people build their businesses and make a livelihood for themselves.
That's great. So I want to ask you about common misconceptions about your field. Full well knowing I've never heard a misconception about your field. So I don't know, maybe there are no misconceptions. Maybe when you guys all get around like a cocktail party, you're telling like inside like food science jokes or whatever. But like, are there any common misconceptions about that industry that someone might hear as they're going through and studying that in college or something that you could dispel?
So the biggest one appears to be that people who think I study food science means I study nutrition. I actually have
Okay.
very little nutrition knowledge. And so, if you think about a food scientist, they're really considering how to manufacture something in a large commercial setting. Now that's really what they're really known for. Versus I don't know anything about personalizing food to an individual. And then on the other end of that, there are people who think that I work in agriculture. I know nothing about agriculture, although I have 2 patents in agriculture, and that was just out of It's not because I'm a specialist or anything. It was a fun little project, but it was just for fun with a client. But yeah, it's just But I don't actively work in agriculture, so I don't. I only happen to know how to grow yams, for example, because I do it as a hobby. So you can talk to me about yams and
Okay.
potatoes. I don't know anything else.
I love sweet potatoes.
Yeah.
I love how this conversation has gone. It's like, yeah, I don't do it, but I've got a couple patents. I don't really know how to write, but I wrote a book. We're just
Yes. So maybe that's the key takeaway is that no matter how much you think or how other people think your limitations are, neither are true.
It's a good takeaway.
Yeah.
Is there a better name that you're like, hey, we shouldn't be food scientists. We should be blank blank.
That's a good
No.
question. I like the term food scientist. I
Okay.
think I mean, food engineer sounds not quite what we do, but that could work a little bit better. But I like
Okay.
to think I'm a food scientist. I like the term.
Awesome. So Brian, we got into a little bit about career, what you're looking like. If we got to a cocktail party, I would never stop asking you questions. You would hate me. Be like, get this guy away from me, because I find this super fascinating. But what did I neglect to ask you that any listeners to this podcast you think is really important for them to know, if anything?
I would say that food scientists are not here to, market bad food to you. I think it's really good to understand that it's not the individual that's making these decisions, but it's a corporate, you know, direction. There are business people who are involved that are making, and marketers are involved. The food scientist has very little say at the end of the day as far as what will happen to what they design. They're really only there to be the hands to design a lot of these, and that's to say, does that mean that people aren't producing food that's bad for you, or overly processed food? I mean, it does happen, and I'm not saying that we're clean of any ethical or moral responsibility in that, but I would like to say that as a food scientist, it's very complicated, and there's a lot that's involved in terms of how we ended up where we are today in terms of our modern food industry. Um, I guess that's my biggest takeaway.
Excellent. One more for you. I should have asked this 20 minutes ago, but I didn't. You went into business for yourself versus working for a private company. What was the reason for going into business for yourself versus working for an established company?
I couldn't find a job.
Okay.
I so I don't know if it's because I don't interview well, or I am so my personality has me be rather stubborn, but I like to do things my own way. And so it turned out that working for myself was the best option because I I did one internship and it never worked out for me. They offered me the
Okay.
job, but I
Okay.
just I just thought this is not where I want to be. I don't want to be told what to do, which is a funny thing for me to say because as a consultant, I still get told what to do, but I get to do it on my own time.
So I probably should have asked that 20 minutes ago because I think so. That's super important to know as well. So we talk. I ask about personalities a lot. I didn't ask you about general personalities because I'm going to assume you're going to run across a pretty big gamut here.
hmm
But that's I think knowing yourself and having confidence to say, "Hey, I know this stuff. I can do this for myself." I think that's a avenue for anyone who knows they're stubborn or maybe overly stubborn or you know doesn't like taking orders from someone else. There are still avenues in that career, and I think that's important for people to know. So I'm glad I asked it, and I'm glad you were honest with the answer.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was really important for me to realize that because for a long time I thought, I don't know if I'm going to make it as an employee. And now I just tell my clients, I'm the worst employee. So don't ever hire me.
Excellent. So Bryan, as we wrap up here, I got to pull apparently 6 careers off the table here. I normally ask someone if they had to choose a different career that they'd be happy in. What would it be? I'm taking author away. I'm taking patent whatever away. You can't do patents, and you can't go into we'll just blanket engineering. What do you think a different career path might be for you?
I would have been a monk. I would have been a Buddhist monk. That
Okay.
I had such a strong feeling about that. It was what I considered doing when I wasn't sure what my path was going to be for a long time. But I eventually met my wife and said to myself, well, she's pretty amazing. So I think I'm going to stick around.
Yeah. You're the third person who said Buddhist monk.
Really? Oh
No,
my
I'm just joking. I'm just joking. You're the first.
God. That's really funny. Yeah.
All right, Bryan. Pleasure having you today. Hey, if someone wants to reach out, ask you a question, learn more about your career, contact you for business, check out more about your book, we'll link it all in the show description. But I'll just tell the audience some best ways for them to get a hold of you.
Yeah, the easiest way is just to search my name in Google search. I've got a whole slew of articles and websites, but Bryan Quoc, so BryanQuocle, and that can be bryanquocle.com as well.
Awesome. Dr. Bryan Lay, everyone, food scientist and industry consultant. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Be sure to like, rate, review, share the podcast, do all that cool stuff they like to do, and spread the word. If you want to explore different careers, or if you're listening, want to share your story with us, check our website to find out more. Until next time, be kind to one another. Go Bills. Unboxing careers, unboxing.